Sunshine cake. Sunshine cake earned its name from both its golden color and its ability to brighten any occasion using old-school techniques. This was angel food cake's richer cousin, made with egg yolks instead of just whites, creating a tender, buttery crumb that captured sunshine in every slice. The technique required patience and precision that separated experienced bakers from beginners. Egg yolks were beaten until thick and pale, then combined with sugar until the mixture was light and fluffy. Cake flour was folded in gently, along with melted butter and vanilla extract. The key was maintaining the airiness while incorporating enough richness to create that signature golden color and tender texture. The cake was baked in an ungreased tube pan, just like angel food, but the results were completely different. Graham cracker cream pie. Graham cracker cream pie was the old-school dessert that elevated humble crackers into something that could anchor any special meal. This wasn't just pie with graham crackers thrown in. This was a carefully constructed dessert that used those sweet, honey-flavored crackers to create textures and flavors that no traditional pie could match. The crust was pure old-school innovation, graham crackers crushed fine and mixed with butter, then pressed into pie pans and baked until golden. This created a sweet, crunchy foundation that complemented rather than competed with the filling. The filling itself was classic vanilla pastry cream, cooked until thick and glossy using time-tested methods, then cooled until just warm enough to pour without melting the crust. But the real genius was in the layers. Some graham crackers were left in larger pieces and layered throughout the filling, creating pockets of texture that would soften during chilling but maintain just enough crunch to provide interest. Date nut loaf. Date nut loaf was the old-school dessert that bridged the gap between cake and candy, creating something that was sophisticated enough for company but comforting enough for every day. This wasn't fruitcake's heavy cousin. This was something entirely its own, with a texture and flavor profile that converted even the most dedicated date skeptics. The preparation started with dates that were chopped fine and soaked in hot water until they softened into a paste-like consistency. This date mixture was combined with butter, sugar, and eggs, creating a base that was naturally sweet and incredibly moist. Walnuts were folded in for crunch, along with just enough flour to bind everything together using traditional methods. Cornflake macaroons. Cornflake macaroons proved that breakfast cereal could become elegant dessert with just a few simple old-school additions. These weren't the coconut macaroons most people knew. These were crispy, golden clusters that delivered familiar flavors in a completely unexpected form. The base was simple but required technique. Cornflakes mixed with shredded coconut and bound together with egg whites that had been whipped to soft peaks. Sugar was added gradually, creating a meringue-like mixture that would hold the cereal and coconut together while baking. Some families added a touch of vanilla or almond extract for extra flavor complexity. The shaping was almost meditative. Spoonfuls of the mixture were dropped onto parchment paper, creating rustic clusters that would bake into golden, crispy treats. The oven had to be just right, hot enough to set the egg whites and toast the cereal, but not so hot that the coconut would burn before the centers were cooked through. Icebox eclair cake. Icebox eclair cake was the old-school dessert that gave home bakers the satisfaction of making eclairs without any of the intimidation factor. This wasn't traditional French pastry. This was American ingenuity at its finest, creating all the flavors and textures of eclairs in a form that anyone could master using time-tested assembly methods. The foundation was graham crackers, arranged in perfect layers that would soften into something resembling pastry as the dessert chilled. Between each layer went vanilla pudding, made from scratch and cooled until thick enough to spread evenly. The assembly required patience. Pudding, crackers, until the dish was full and the top was crowned with a final layer of pudding. The finishing touch was what made this old-school dessert special, a chocolate glaze that was poured over the top and allowed to drip down the sides. Icebox fruitcake. Icebox fruitcake revolutionized America's relationship with fruitcake by eliminating everything people hated about the traditional version while keeping everything they secretly loved. This wasn't the dense, boozy brick that became holiday jokes. This was light, fresh, and actually disappeared from serving plates instead of being regifted for decades. The genius was in the old-school construction that required no baking. Instead of forcing fruit into heavy cake batter, this version layered everything cold. Vanilla wafers formed the base, arranged in neat rows that would soften into cake-like texture as the dessert chilled. The fruit component was a mixture of chopped dates, candied cherries, and toasted nuts, all bound together with sweetened whipped cream instead of dense batter. After overnight chilling, the wafers had absorbed moisture and flavors from the fruit mixture, creating something that had all the familiar fruitcake tastes, but with a texture that was light and refreshing rather than heavy and dense. Chocolate haystacks. Chow mein cookies. Chocolate haystacks, also known as chow mein cookies, were the old-school dessert that proved candy and cookies could merge into something that was better than either component alone. These weren't traditional cookies in any sense. They were clusters of chocolate and crunch that required no baking and delivered maximum satisfaction with minimal effort. The base was simple but genius. Chocolate chips or chocolate candy melted until smooth and glossy. Into this chocolate went chow mein noodles, those crispy, crunchy noodles that added texture and visual interest that no traditional cookie ingredient could match. Some families added peanuts or other nuts for extra crunch and flavor complexity. The mixture was stirred until every noodle was coated with chocolate, then spooned onto waxed paper in small mounds that resembled tiny haystacks. As the chocolate cooled and hardened, it bound the noodles together into clusters that were part candy, part cookie, and completely addictive. The finished haystacks had a unique texture that combined the smoothness of chocolate with the crunch of noodles, creating something that was satisfying to eat and fun to look at. The chocolate provided richness, while the noodles added textural interest that kept each bite interesting and unpredictable. These appeared at bake sales, where they always sold first, at holiday cookie exchanges, where they stood out from traditional offerings, and any time someone needed to make a lot of treats quickly. They represented American creativity at its finest, taking ingredients from completely different culinary traditions and combining them into something new and wonderful. Self-saucing, butterscotch, pudding cake. Self-saucing, butterscotch. Pudding cake was the old-school dessert that seemed to defy physics, creating its own sauce while baking and delivering two desserts in one pan. This wasn't magic, though it seemed like it. This was clever technique that used the principles of heat and moisture to create something that looked impossible but tasted incredible. The cake batter was simple: flour, sugar, butter, and milk combined into a basic cake mixture that was spread in a buttered baking dish. The magic happened with the topping: brown sugar and cocoa powder for chocolate versions, or just brown sugar for pure butterscotch, were sprinkled evenly over the batter. Then hot water was poured carefully over the entire surface. The physics were beautiful to watch unfold. As the dessert baked, the cake batter rose to the top, while the sugar and water mixture sank to the bottom, creating its own caramel sauce through the heat of the oven. What went in looking like a disaster came out as a perfect cake, floating on a pool of rich butterscotch sauce. The serving was part of the spectacle that made this dessert memorable. The cake was scooped from the pan, revealing the golden cake portion and the rich sauce underneath. Each serving got both components, creating a dessert that was warm, comforting, and completely satisfying. The cake was tender and moist, while the sauce was rich and buttery with deep caramel flavors. This old-school dessert appeared at family dinners where something warm and comforting was needed, at potluck gatherings where impressive presentations mattered, and anytime someone wanted to serve something that would generate conversation and requests for the recipe. Brown sugar dumplings. Brown sugar dumplings were the old-school dessert that turned simple syrup into a vehicle for delivering pure comfort in dumpling form. This wasn't fruit cobbler or traditional dumplings. This was something uniquely American that combined the satisfaction of bread with the sweetness of candy in one perfect spoonful. The syrup came first. Brown sugar, butter, and water cooked together until bubbling and smooth, creating a rich caramel base that would both flavor and cook the dumplings. Some families added a touch of vanilla or cinnamon to the syrup, while others preferred the pure, unadulterated taste of caramelized sugar that spoke for itself. The dumpling dough was simple but crucial. Flour, sugar, baking powder, and milk combined into a soft dough that would steam rather than bake in the hot syrup. The dough was dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling syrup, where it would cook through steam and heat, absorbing flavors while maintaining a tender, bread-like texture. The cooking process was almost meditative, watching the dumplings puff and cook in the golden syrup, filling the kitchen with aromas of caramelized sugar and warm bread that could draw people from every corner of the house. When done, the dumplings were tender and sweet, having absorbed syrup flavors throughout while maintaining their structure. This old-school dessert was served warm, with the dumplings ladled from the pot, along with generous amounts of the rich syrup that had cooked them. Each bite delivered sweet, tender dumplings surrounded by buttery caramel sauce. It appeared at family dinners where comfort food was the goal, at church suppers where satisfying desserts were needed, and any time someone wanted to create something that felt like a warm hug in dessert form. Oatmeal pie. Oatmeal pie was the old-school dessert that proved breakfast ingredients could create something worthy of the finest dinner parties. This wasn't oatmeal cookies in pie form. This was a rich, custard-like creation that used oats to create textures and flavors that no traditional pie could match. The filling was where the magic happened through careful balance of ingredients. Oats were combined with eggs, corn syrup, brown sugar, and butter, creating a mixture that would set into something resembling pecan pie, but with its own unique character. The oats provided texture and nutty flavor while absorbing the sweet custard mixture during baking. Some old-school versions included coconut or chopped nuts for additional texture, while others relied on the oats alone to provide interest and substance. The key was balancing the liquid ingredients so the filling would set properly without becoming too dense or too loose. Vanilla extract was essential for rounding out the flavors and preventing the pie from tasting too much like actual oatmeal. The baking process transformed the simple ingredients into something elegant and sophisticated. The top developed a golden crust, while the interior remained creamy and rich, with the oats distributed throughout in a pattern that looked almost like pecan pie from a distance, but delivered its own unique satisfaction. The finished pie was rich, sweet, and surprisingly sophisticated, with a texture that was part custard, part cookie, and completely satisfying. It appeared at holiday tables where traditional desserts were expected, but something different was desired, at potluck gatherings where unique contributions were valued, and any time someone wanted to prove that simple ingredients could create extraordinary results. Ready for wartime genius? 2430 are pure. How is that a dessert? Vinegar pie. Vinegar pie was the old-school dessert that proved desperation could create delicacy, turning one of the most unlikely ingredients into something that tasted remarkably like lemon meringue pie. This wasn't a mistake or a joke. This was legitimate pie that used vinegar's acidity to create the same bright, tart flavors that expensive lemons provided, making elegant dessert accessible during the hardest times. In households where lemons were a luxury that appeared only at Christmas, vinegar became the miracle ingredient that could satisfy cravings for citrus brightness any time of year. The filling was pure chemistry, disguised as cooking. Apple cider vinegar was combined with water, sugar, eggs, and a small amount of flour, creating a custard base that would set during baking. The vinegar provided the essential acidity that made the pie taste bright and fresh, while the sugar balanced the tartness into something that was surprisingly pleasant. The transformation was almost magical, harsh, pungent vinegar becoming something delicate and refined through the alchemy of heat and sweetness. The key was using the right vinegar in the right proportions. Too much, and the pie would be inedibly sour. Too little, and it would be bland and sweet. Apple cider vinegar was preferred for its slightly fruity undertones, while white vinegar was too harsh for most palates. Some bakers added a touch of lemon extract if available, but the vinegar alone was sufficient to create the desired flavor profile. Experienced pie makers could taste the filling before baking and adjust the balance perfectly, creating consistency that even expensive ingredients couldn't guarantee. The baking process was crucial. The filling had to set without curdling, requiring gentle heat and careful timing. When done properly, the pie had a smooth, custard-like filling with a golden color and a flavor that was remarkably similar to lemon curd. A meringue topping was traditional, completing the illusion and adding sweetness to balance the tart filling. The meringue also provided visual appeal, creating a dessert that looked every bit as elegant as its expensive counterpart. People who tasted vinegar pie without knowing the ingredients often guessed it was lemon, testament to how successfully this humble ingredient could masquerade as something much more expensive. Children who had never tasted real lemon pie couldn't tell the difference, while adults who knew both versions often admitted to preferring the vinegar version for its more consistent flavor. It appeared on tables during the Depression and wartime, proving that good dessert didn't require expensive ingredients, just creativity and understanding of how flavors worked together. The serving ritual became part of the pie's charm. Experienced bakers would slice it with theatrical flair, watching guests' faces transform from polite acceptance to genuine surprise and delight. The pie cut cleanly, revealing that perfect custard filling that looked exactly like its lemon counterpart, but somehow tasted even better. Some families made it a game, challenging dinner guests to identify the mystery ingredient that created such bright, clean flavors. Saltine cracker pie, mock pecan. Saltine cracker pie was the old-school dessert that proved texture could be just as important as flavor, creating something that looked, felt, and almost tasted like expensive pecan pie, using nothing more than crackers, eggs, and sugar. This wasn't just making do. This was culinary alchemy that transformed humble ingredients into something that could fool even sophisticated palates. In regions where pecan trees didn't grow and imported nuts were prohibitively expensive, this recipe democratized one of the South's most beloved desserts. The secret was in the preparation of the crackers. Saltine crackers were broken into pieces, not crushed to crumbs, but broken into irregular chunks that would mimic the size and shape of pecan pieces. These were mixed with beaten eggs, corn syrup or sugar syrup, and vanilla extract, creating a filling that looked remarkably similar to traditional pecan pie filling. The breaking technique mattered enormously. Pieces that were too small would dissolve during baking, while pieces that were too large would remain obviously cracker-like. The magic happened during baking. The crackers absorbed the sweet custard mixture while maintaining their shape and providing textural interest that was surprisingly similar to nuts. The saltiness of the crackers provided a subtle contrast to the sweet filling, creating the same sweet-salty balance that made pecan pie so appealing. As the pie baked, the crackers softened and darkened, taking on the appearance of nuts suspended in golden custard. When sliced, the pie revealed what looked like pecan filling studded with nuts, but closer inspection showed the telltale square edges of cracker pieces. The texture was remarkably convincing. The crackers had softened just enough to lose their crispness, while maintaining enough structure to provide the chewiness that people expected from pecan pie. The flavor was rich and sweet, with just enough saltiness to create complexity. This old-school pie appeared at gatherings where people expected traditional pecan pie and got something that was 95% as satisfying for a fraction of the cost. The reveal always generated amazement and disbelief, followed by requests for the recipe. Some people actually preferred it to real pecan pie, claiming the crackers provided better texture consistency than nuts, which could be tough or stale. It represented the height of Depression-era resourcefulness, proving that with enough creativity, almost any expensive ingredient could be successfully imitated. Mock apple pie, Ritz. Mock apple pie using Ritz crackers was perhaps the most famous fake-out in American baking history, and for good reason. This impossible creation actually worked, creating something that tasted convincingly like apple pie using no apples whatsoever. This wasn't desperation cooking. This was magic disguised as necessity, proving that texture and flavor could be manipulated in ways that defied all logic. The recipe became so famous that Ritz crackers still prints it on their boxes today, a testament to how well this impossible substitution worked. The genius was in understanding what made apple pie appealing. It wasn't just the apples, it was the tender texture, the sweet tart flavor, and the way fruit absorbed spices during baking. Ritz crackers, when broken and soaked in a lemon sugar syrup, could mimic all of these characteristics with startling accuracy. The cracker's buttery flavor actually enhanced the illusion, providing richness that complemented the fake fruit filling perfectly. The preparation was almost ritualistic. Ritz crackers were broken into irregular pieces and layered in a pie shell, then covered with a syrup made from water, sugar, lemon juice, and cream of tartar. Cinnamon and nutmeg were essential for creating the familiar apple pie spice profile. The mixture was topped with dots of butter and a second crust, then baked until golden. The cream of tartar was crucial. It provided additional tartness and helped the syrup achieve the right consistency. The chemistry was beautiful. The crackers absorbed the lemony syrup and softened into something that had the texture of cooked apples, while the lemon provided the tartness that people expected from apple pie. The spices completed the illusion, creating a flavor profile that was remarkably convincing. During baking, the crackers released their buttery flavor into the syrup, creating richness that actual apples couldn't match. When served, even people who knew the secret had trouble believing their taste buds. The pie looked exactly like apple pie, with tender fruit-like pieces visible through the crust. The flavor was so convincing that many people preferred it to actual apple pie, claiming it was more consistent and never disappointing like real apples could be. The texture was perfect, tender but not mushy, with just enough substance to feel satisfying. This pie became legendary during the Depression and World War II, when apples were expensive or unavailable. It appeared at church suppers and family gatherings where people expected apple pie and got something that was somehow both fake and better than the real thing. The recipe spread through communities like wildfire, shared by women who took pride in their ability to create something special from nothing. It represented the ultimate triumph of ingenuity over limitation, proving that American creativity could overcome any shortage or hardship.